let's go ahead, and we've got a couple of developments. Some a big name player has been going to be joining the SEC. A few others. So let's jump on into the portal. Man, we have been talking about KeAndre Lambert-Smith a lot. He was like the first player into the portal, or at least, expected to jump into the portal.
Some Penn State fans will probably say he went in the portal in October.
Some Penn State fans might. So, Bud, what should Auburn fans be thinking about the commitment from KeAndre Lambert-Smith to the Tigers? Auburn getting a wide receiver, not a surprise at all. Hugh Freeze put it into words at the end of Auburn's spring practice. We're going to be looking for a wide receiver. We're going to be looking for a defensive lineman. This at least addresses one of those. What do we think is what do we think an Auburn fan is looking at with KeAndre Lambert-Smith?
I think he's a guy that has pretty nice athleticism. He's not a huge guy. He can make some contested catches despite the size. It's just not a great year for receivers in the transfer portal. I think part of that is because of what we're going to see tonight with how many of the sport's top receivers are gone. Like if you had to go sit down and make a top 25 returning receivers list right now, it's actually a fairly challenging exercise, I think, once you get past like 14 or 15. So Auburn got probably the most proven receiver, assuming that he meshes culture-wise and wants to be there and work hard and all that stuff. I made the joke on Twitter like last year. The third best receiver in the Big Ten left Michigan, left the Big Ten to go get away from Peyton Thorne, and now the third best receiver in the Big Ten, which I don't think I really believe, but it made for good social media. Left the Big Ten to go play with Peyton Thorne. So
I think the three best receivers in the Big Ten were all in Ohio State.
I think so too, actually. Yeah.
Hey, Deion Burks?
I would 100%.
Yeah, Deion Burks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Don't you think an Auburn fan is like, hey, our leading receiver last year had 394 yards receiving. We'll take whatever we can get right now.
Sure.
Like I think they should be excited. Like this is a good get for them of the available options. I don't think it's going to go the way that Keon Coleman did. Like I don't think he's going to be one of the best receivers out there or a top draft pick next year. But I think it's an upgrade, which is good.
Yeah, it's the thing where when a player enters the transfer portal in the eyes of fans, he immediately becomes 5 times better than he actually is just because he's available and you have a need. And I think KeAndre Lambert-Smith, as we've discussed, it's like he's kind of just a jag plus of receivers. We talked about all last year and the year before how Penn State's receiving core, they were severely lacking a number one guy who could kind of take them to that next level in the passing game along with the quarterback. And KeAndre Lambert-Smith was that number one guy. So now that he's transferred to Auburn, I'm not going to pretend he's just, some incredible get for him. He's a good get. But honestly, of the receivers that committed yesterday, I kind of like Justin Ross Simmons from Colorado State more than I like KeAndre Lambert-Smith. Of the 3 named guys who committed yesterday, I liked what I saw from him in the limited time I saw Colorado State. I obviously didn't watch them as much as I watched Penn State, but I thought that was kind of an under the radar kind of move.
It's sort of like, to me, bowl insurance. Mm-hmm. I think Auburn has very limited upside this year because some of the positions that I like on this team, I don't project personally to be ready for this year. But if you go get a guy like Lambert-Smith, assuming he wants to play hard and play for you, it probably helps to make sure that you don't backslide and you don't miss a bowl. We're going to hear the narrative about Hugh Freeze calling the plays this year and all that stuff. Is that Banaka or throat spray?
That's the Israeli throat spray.
Okay, got it.
Some kind of propolis raw honey throat spray.
Auburn is probably what, a 7-5 projection right now. This helps them. I think it drastically increases their odds that they get to at least 6. And that's important, for recruiting, for image, for all, to make sure you don't get fired after just 3 years. It's very important, especially given what happened in the bowl game last year to Maryland, that Auburn does not backslide. And I don't think they will backslide, but this just helps to kind of fortify the floor of that team. I don't think it does much for the ceilings. I don't really think there's much Auburn can do to actually elevate into that next tier of the SEC, given where they are in the developmental cycle of the roster.
Good point. there's another big headline from the portal, which is Georgia keeping one of its extremely talented defensive linemen from entering the portal. News breaking here in the last day or so that Christen Miller is out of the portal and will stay at Georgia. We have talked about Georgia's defense with, kind of like a intrigue and nitpicky variety, right? I mean, we believe that there's an extremely high floor for Georgia's defense, right? I mean, just no one in their right mind believes that collection of talent and coaches is going to stink. But whether or not it's going to be one of the best defenses in the SEC, whether it's going to be one of the best defenses in the country, that's where it gets into, do you think they have difference makers along the defensive line that can get a push? Do you think that they're going to be able to replace the 3 NFL draft bound players in the secondary? These are going to be the things that we're looking at when Georgia plays its toughest games of the year. Bud, what do you make of Miller sticking with the Dogs?
Yeah, if Miller's like your DT4 or DT5, I think that's a pretty nice depth. I still question if Georgia has like a Jalen Carter type game record on the interior, but I am pretty pleased with what I've heard out of Georgia about all their edge players. And I'm going to couple that with the intel that I got from Florida State, which is that they are really happy with Marvin Jones Jr., and he was a backup at Georgia. So if that guy, who I firmly believe will pair with Pat Payton to be like one of the very best defensive end combos in the country this year, if he's a backup at Georgia, Georgia fans need to be feeling extremely good about the edge rush this year. Those guys are no joke. I don't think they need to be incredible on the defensive interior. Okay, they just need to be a little bit better than they were last year when they were dinged up, and they're a year older. And who's the really big kid who they got out of, I think it was North Carolina? Jamal Jarrett? That sound right? Chad will tell me. I try to look at the screen more, look at my other screens less, but like really like 350-pounder type kid. Apparently he's coming along well. So that's an encouraging sign for them at nose as far as holding the point of attack. No, not Jordan Hall, Jamal Jarrett.
Jamal Jarrett, yep.
Yeah.
I will say, with Miller returning, it's probably a solid idea. It probably means, he got what he was looking for. But I wonder too, if you're a Georgia interior defensive lineman, and you know that, obviously there are plenty of teams that are interested in defensive tackles in the portal right now. So you could probably command a pretty nice figure. Wouldn't you want to weigh your future earnings up against Georgia's done a pretty good job of developing interior defensive linemen and sending them to the NFL. You know what I mean? It's I wouldn't mind being a rotation guy if I realized I could probably start next year and then get it a 1st or 2nd round pick.
There's some positions where I think your future earnings are basically determined entirely by God and your work ethic.
Mm-hmm.
I think Jalen Carter would have been picked no higher and no lower if he went to any major school. And D tackle is one of those positions. I just think it's how big and freaky are you and how hard do you want to work? I don't think Barry Alexander would be drafted any higher by staying at UGA than going to USC or going to a different school every single year.
But there's that whole iron sharpens iron mentality. Whereas when you look at the depth chart at Georgia, you have to work hard or your ass is just going to get pushed out the door because they'll find somebody else to replace you.
That's true. But some positions, I think it matters. Receiver, I think it's important you get developed and actually learn how to run routes and some of the nuances of the position.
I think you're speaking from the mindset of a grown man, not a kid who's going to put out a rap about not being able to sleep because he's thinking about NIL, right? You guys saw the rap release, right? So, I do think the other thing too, when I saw this originally was I think there are some organizations, if a player leaves 49ers, in one of the more respected organizations, you're why'd they let that guy go? Because almost anybody, I think Georgia's one of those schools where if they lose a player, quote, like Bear Alexander, I'm they probably could have kept him. So they know, they've seen him, I think it's been good, but not great for USC. It's kind of how I feel about Miller. So the fact that they brought him back tells me they must see potential. They must have figured out the number, but they didn't let him go. So I think that's a good thing for Georgia. They kept one of their own. But on the flip side, if they would have lost him, been they must not have loved him.
This is also a Georgia program that should be preparing for a 16-game season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you need depth, man.
You when you're able to keep those bodies fresh and the snaps are not adding up, that's something that you can be working on, making sure you're ready for December and January, in September and October, just with the way that you're able to manage some of these things. Someone gets, hit with a little soft tissue. You don't have to force them back out there just because you've got that depth. So that does seem advantageous. We got some more official news. I know we talked a little bit on Wednesday. Jaden Rashada, the tailgate says Jaden Rashada just committed to Georgia, making that official. Danny, I'll throw this to you. We were wondering, and especially as a former quarterback, you might be able to give us some insight into this. Do you think that we are starting to enter into a new era of the quarterback position where we've got Dante Moore agreeing to go? And basically, if Dylan Gabriel gets hurt, Dante Moore's in there. But the plan is, I'm going to go and I'm going to be second, and then I'm going to take over. Arch Manning not hitting the portal, staying at Texas. I'm going to run second, then I'm going to take over. A Jaden Rashada move that I think has to be viewed in the same way. You're playing behind Carson Beck, and then you take over. Is this what are the factors that you think contribute to us starting to see a little bit of a new trend here in the portal era?
I think the schools with the deepest pockets will be able to have a pretty crowded quarterback room, at least relatively speaking. I think Georgia has a luxury, Texas has a luxury to be able to stash quarterbacks and say, you know what, you're going to have to wait. You're going to have to be patient, but you're going to be compensated while you do wait. And when you wait your turn, it's going to be great. You're going to have all this talent around you. Me coming out of college, I did not want to play early. I do think in the last 15 years, we've seen this rush to play because you wanted to get on film and you wanted to be a first rounder. You wanted to play. You felt like you had to start. I think now people are realizing, you know what, maybe my best opportunity is playing with really good supporting cast, really good surrounding talent, taking my time, being patient, and then we'll see what happens. But I think the fact that I do think there's a limit on who can do this, though, financially. Ohio State, we've talked about their quarterback depth. I mean, think about the schools that we've talked about that are able to keep multiple 5-stars and one that he's not going to play. This is the case. Oregon, another one. Dante Moore is probably not going to play. They can pay top dollar for a backup quarterback. But I do think to your question, I do think this might be something. I think everybody ticks differently. There's going to be some players that want to go play right away, play as a freshman. But I do think it's wise to put yourself in this position and say, let's take the slow road. Let's develop, because it is still a big jump, even though players feel like they're more ready than ever before and they've been running the same offenses. It's still a big jump.
Yeah. When the portal started, it was oh my gosh, whoever we don't pick as the starter is going to hit the portal right away.
Right.
And now it's almost it's hitting the next step in the evolution where very talented players are coming out of the portal and signing up to not be a starter. And I do think that is a little bit of a shift from, the portal opened in 17, 18, isn't that somewhere around there is the beginning of the transfer portal era. And so now it's, now Rashada seems to be a little bit of a new wave that we're not going to be able to see, like you mentioned, Danny, all the schools take, but certainly could be something of value.
An interesting case study will be Dylan Raiola at Nebraska. Because we saw Dante Moore get to play for UCLA, not top tier talent, was a little overwhelmed, struggled somewhat, and then he bounces. I'm not saying that Dylan Raiola isn't going to work, and I think he'll be better. But it's still a big jump, and you're not playing with the same amount of talent, that those other schools are, if you're not equal or less than a lot of schools you're playing against.
Thank you for setting this up, Danny, because I have a time machine transfer portal update. I've gone into the future by a year for the headline that we'll be talking about on April 25th, 2025. Georgia quarterback Jaden Rashada has entered the transfer portal. This news comes a day after Nebraska quarterback Dylan Raiola announced his commitment to Georgia.
That's it. Look,
Nebraska spring game coming up on Saturday. Future Bulldogs quarterback Dylan Raiola.
Not wanting to talk about players as assets, but now that you're running payroll, basically they are. This is a very cheap lottery ticket with a lot of upside. He would have cost a lot more last year. There are certain minimum physical traits that you need to be the quarterback of a school like Georgia in most cases, right? And I think he has some of those physical traits. We'll see if the work ethic and the dedication and all that kind of stuff can come along with that. But it costs Georgia very little to do this. I would assume. Like I don't think they're paying. I think they're paying a real cut rate most likely to get him in. He gets to a program that has some stability. I mean, look, it's not like it's impossible for him to win this job in 25. I think it's unlikely, but I don't think it's like crazy impossible for it to happen. So I just see such little downside here.
Yeah, what I was gonna that was gonna be my last button up here was like, so where's Rashada at? We saw like a very little bit, got a little bit banged up, done incomplete, rookie season.
Yeah, and then he got hurt, moving some boxes. I think I read, so he wasn't really doing a whole lot in spring. Hopefully he's recovered from that.
It's for me, and I'll be happily proven wrong. It's just you look at the timeline of events for Jaden Rashada going all the way back to the Florida thing, and it's just the lack of continuity, the lack of any kind of structured plan around him, the lack of any kind of predictability. Then you add on the injury. Like this is going to be what, 3 or 4 years of him hardly playing any football other than practice. Like it's hard for me to sit there and look at that and say, okay, well, he's going to live up to the initial ranking that people had on him coming out of high school. It's like when you're bouncing around like that and you're going through all these different situations, it's kind of, the draft is tonight. We'll be talking about it. It's like when you draft a quarterback in the NFL and then he's there for his rookie year and then you fire the coaching staff and you bring in somebody new and the guy's learning a new playbook every year. And it's like, well, why the hell did this guy bust? It's kind of a similar thing to me with Rashada, whereas it's hard for me to look at that and say, all right, that's a guy that Georgia's looking at as their starter in 2025.
Totally. Like I think quarterback is on the completely other end of the spectrum as far as positions that I actually care about some continuity and like being developed. Like running back and D line are on the other side. Like you could tell me, hey, this guy's been at 5 schools in 5 years on the D line. I'm like, cool. Is he big and fast? Don't care. Like let's go. Quarterback, a bunch of different schools in 4 years. That's a major concern for me.